Awesome. Welcome back to Mentality Mondays, a healthy masculinity conversation series through the Mentality Project. I'm Anthony Siliberto, one of the co-leads for the Mentality Project. We're very excited to have Alicia and Liz join us as our special guests today. I'll also be co-hosting with my co-lead, Chelsea Hill, and I will let Chelsea introduce themselves, and then we'll get started.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Chelsea Hill. I use she and they pronouns. I'm one of the health promotion specialists here at the Well for Health Promotion. I specialize in sexual health, sexual violence prevention, and men's engagement initiatives on campus. So good to see
y'all. So Alicia and Liz, can you just tell us a little bit about yourself and the work that you do at Tulane?
Okay, I'll get started. My name is Alicia Czachowski. I am the Director of Public Health Initiatives and Assessment for Campus Health. So basically what that means is I manage the Well for Health Promotion, assessment for campus health, marketing and communication, the recovery community, and right now contact tracing.
Hi everyone, I'm Liz Schafer. I am the Director of Fraternity and Sorority Programs. I have been at Tulane for almost 11 years, and I feel really privileged to have the responsibility to work with all of our fraternities and sororities. Our community typically has about 3,000 students. We have 24 organizations right now, is that right, Anthony?
Around there.
From year to year. I work specifically with both our National Pan-Hellenic Council, which is our historically African American organizations, and our Multicultural Greek Council, and oversee all the larger initiatives within the department.
Thank you so much. You guys both agreed to be a part of the Mentality Project today, and we're so excited to have you. So let's just start the conversation off with talking about how does your work specifically interact with healthy masculinity and violence prevention on campus?
Sure, well, I can start. So, obviously being responsible for the fraternity community, we have about 30 to 35% of the undergraduate male population, depending on the year. And so we feel really strongly that our fraternities should be a place that, that our men are learning the essential skills about how to have healthy masculinity as part of their lives. Fraternities, not surprisingly, have the reputation, and in many cases that reputation is well founded, of being the home for toxic masculinity. And so we really try to work with our fraternity men and also the folks in all of our organizations to make sure that the members of these groups are exhibiting healthy masculinity.
And I would say from my side of things, I manage the Jennifer Hunt, who I don't know if she's a part of this series at all, but also then Chelsea, as doing our sexual violence prevention work. And clearly, men are a huge part of this conversation. And traditionally, I would say in a lot of spaces, it's been a female identified focused topic area where we haven't been talking as much about positive masculinity or toxic masculinity or men's role in this whole prevention effort at all. So one of the things that I know that we have been focusing on over the last few years while I've been here is bringing men into these conversations and not just looking at them as, the problem, but really part of the solution.
Just going deeper into that, since y'all have been working at Tulane, have you seen more male-identified students be involved in the conversations or want to get involved in conversations around masculinity and violence prevention?
Yeah, absolutely. So several years ago, my timeline is totally gone. I can't remember what happened when, but several years ago, we first started the One Wave program, and that was geared toward educating our students about sexual violence prevention from a bystander intervention perspective. I mean, that's really the first place that I saw a lot of our male-identified students really start to engage themselves with the issue. It was fascinating to me personally when the researchers who worked on One Wave with us did their initial interviews of students and focus groups. They said they had never seen a student population that had such a low understanding of consent, and that was across the board. And when we gave that feedback back to our students and said that to them, the male identified students in particular were just blown away. And not that they were surprised to hear it, but as it was explained to them and they started to understand it, they all, I mean, so many of them across the board were like, oh my God, that's true. I never did really learn any of this stuff. I got to college, you know, I thought I knew everything, and I absolutely did not. And so that was the first place I really started to see it. And then since then, you know, every year sort of progressively, we see more and more of our male identified students being really interested and engaged in the issue. I remember one really specific case several years ago. One of our fraternity presidents had to go through the student conduct process because of a sexual harassment case. Very clear that he had done what he was accused of doing. And part of his sanction was that he had to work with Dr. Red Tremmel, first on doing some one-on-one work, but then on creating some programming. You know, it was a restorative justice type sanction for him. And I mean, it was this classic case, sort of like made for TV movie case of a student learning what had brought him to the place that made him feel like it was okay for him to use the language that he did around women, to, you know, act bro-y and truly classic toxic masculine around his fraternity brothers. And he just became sort of the poster child on campus for saying, men, we have got to do better, and fraternity men in particular, we've got to do better. And really since then, again, progressively, I've just seen things get more and more talked about on our campus, and the issues are just more prevalent, and something that the guys we work with, for the most part, are really comfortable talking about and trying to address.
And I would say the same thing from our end is you're seeing something in our, especially in our peer education groups. Peer education has, I would say, traditionally been female dominated. We are seeing more and more men or male identified individuals apply to be in our peer education groups, be interested in our peer education groups, and not just want to be talking about alcohol and other drugs, but really are very interested in talking about sexual health, sexual violence prevention, and those kind of topic areas traditionally that they may not have been as excited about in the past. I think one of the things that really stood out to me last year was we had this group of 4 first-year men who were involved in leadership on campus, and as part of their project, they were in the honors program. They really wanted to focus on sexual violence prevention from a male perspective, and came to our office with ideas on doing a fair. We luckily got it in before everything went virtual, and we're able to work with them as part of our sexual health fair that we did last spring. And it was just fantastic. And they came to us. We did not go to them. This was a project that they were interested in, they were excited about, and wanted to push out there.
Really awesome. And I'm glad to hear like the perspective of 2 professionals that have been at Tulane longer than both Chelsea and I have.
Yes. Well, we'd like to talk about what led to the creation of the Mentality Project, actually.
Yeah, so I can take this one because I was here. Alicia and I have joked that she got here like right as this was starting, like day one. So the main thing that I would say led to the creation of the program was the sexual violence climate survey that we did. And again, from my perspective, we really expected the results of the climate survey to show that fraternity men were more likely to be perpetrators than unaffiliated men were on campus. Everything that we had seen in other data gathered across the country pointed to the expectation that that was what Tulane's data were going to show as well. We were really, really happily surprised that that was not the case. The statistical significance between the two populations really, really low. Like technically there is nothing, no statistical significant difference between the two. But we had prepared our students in advance. You know, we did a huge PR campaign going into the climate survey to get our students to participate in the survey so that we knew that we would have a good data pool. You know, it wasn't like, oh, we're gonna get the 12 guys who we know have never done anything bad and they'll answer the survey. I mean, we had something like 85% of our fraternities had 100% participation in the survey. And similarly, we really pushed our sororities to answer the survey as well so that we would know, you know, so that we knew that we would have really good data. But leading up during that same PR campaign, we also were saying to the students, look, be ready. This data is probably not going to look good for you. So you need to be ready to talk about what you're doing to try to change, you know, what the statistics are showing. So we were, again, happily surprised that that was not the case, but we had already kind of teed it up that our students were talking about it and starting to make change. And so one of the major things that the climate survey told us was just a reinforcement of what that research on One Wave had told us several years ago, which was that our students just didn't really know a lot of stuff. There was not much talk about healthy masculinity. Like we'd started the conversations, but it wasn't happening university-wide. The other thing I will say, and this is maybe going to sound a little kooky, but this is something I personally have wondered about for several years since we did create the project. So many of you are aware, after Hurricane Katrina, the university dissolved our coordinate college system. So we had Newcomb College that was for the female identified students on campus and Paul T. William College for male identified students. At that point, when we had the two coordinate colleges, there were staff members in each of the colleges that were really focused on doing development for the students in those groups. And so there was a staff that was called Newcomb Student Programs and a staff that was called Tulane Student Programs that focused really specifically on programming for men and programming for women. Katrina happens, understandably, that system goes away, we consolidate the two. The Newcomb College Institute is the outgrowth of that because of the endowment that had been created for, you know, by Servant Newcomb's family. And so programming for women continued. Programming for men came to a halt. And my guess is, in retrospect, and again, this is purely my guess, but I do think there's probably something there, because everybody sort of felt like, you know, men have advantages. Women are more disadvantaged than women, so maybe we don't need to do as much programming for men. I feel like we lost a lot of time there. I feel like we really missed some opportunities as an institution during that period to teach our men about healthy masculinity. And so when the results of the climate survey came back, the folks who were working really specifically on what the response to it should be said, we've got to do some programming for men. We've got to do some things that are really focused on teaching our male identified students how to be positive men in our community, period. And we then said, fraternity men are this huge piece of the population. They're a target audience that is easy to reach, and they're a group that has a lot of social influence. And so if we can get to them and convince them that this is an issue that they really need to be focused on, then we can start to make some change that will filter out to other folks in the community.
Thank you. And I would say from our kind of side of things, and I will say, yes, this was day one that I met Liz sitting around a table, having a conversation around sexual violence prevention, my first day on campus, and all of the talk of not just toxic masculinity, but really, instead of focusing on that, focusing on the empowering and encouraging the positive masculinity, the healthy masculinity, was really the direction that we went in. And that offshoot of that meeting and that conversation was, okay, what are we going to do? How are we going to do it? And at the time, it was, I'm going to be on a bunch of female identified people sitting around going, okay, how are we going to do this? We needed to bring men into this. We needed, and so part of this was the creation of Anthony's position, and having a male-identified human over on the fraternity and sorority side of things to work with a person on the welfare health promotion side of things to create programming and to create something that was really geared toward the male-identified folks of the university. And I think not only just the fraternity men, because obviously that's going to be Anthony's focus of things, but by also having our team involved in these conversations, we can then bring that programming out into the general student population and kind of bring in those students who are not involved in fraternities on campus. So we've kind of been able to weed our way out there, and the Mentality Project is just that. It's co-founded and co-hosted by our two departments, but it's really for any male on campus, regardless of affiliation with fraternities and sororities.
So, can you all just talk about how you have seen the project grow since its beginning, and where you'd like to see it continue to go as well?
When it first started, it was, we started out really with some focus groups. We didn't know what we needed. We didn't know what would speak to the men on campus. So we did a lot of focus groups, a lot of lunches. I know the person previous to Anthony started those, and then Anthony kind of really took those and ran with them to really kind of figure out, okay, what would speak to the men of this campus? What are they looking for? We did a lot of research into what other schools were doing for men's programming. The funny thing is we had a lot. It's geared toward men, but at the same time, anybody can come to these programs. We had a lot of female identified people come to our focus groups, which was fun, and to hear kind of what they would like to see our men learning about. But so from that, we then were able to kind of craft some programming, and ideally, like, it started up with kind of a cohort series. Just like everything else, COVID has kind of mucked everything up to some degree. But we've been able to do some more things like this, virtual programming, asynchronous learning, and hopefully having, especially some more of our male-identified staff and faculty from across campus. That's one of the things I'd really personally like to see, and talk about their perspectives of positive masculinity and their work around it, because we have a lot of great male-identified humans on this campus and that don't work in these areas, that have some really strong backgrounds in this area that our students wouldn't even know about.
Yeah, that's the piece that I think is really interesting and exciting too. You know, during the first cohort sort of dry run, we had a variety of folks who worked at that time within the Division of Student Affairs who were male identified, who either were guest speakers or helped with the curriculum development. But like Alicia said, I think as we branch out to just reach out to other male identified faculty and staff on campus to say, we're not asking for a huge commitment from you. We would love it if you would just come talk to folks for 45 minutes, whether it's doing this type of thing or, you know, coming to a lunch and learn or whatever. And, you know, I think the other piece of it, just to jump off also what Alicia said, a lot of it to me is not just having experience working with this topic, but just having life experience. And I think that's one of the things really, really important that so many of our quote unquote adult men on campus have to share with our male identified students, is that you can, you know, I can think of all kinds of faculty members who work in sort of classically male dominated, rowy type fields who also have a really healthy relationship with their own masculinity, and being able to explain that to our male identified students will be really important.
And even some of our men who are in some of our really powerful positions. I don't know, for the people watching this, if any of you heard Will Furbos or attended Shifting the Narrative. I mean, he just, honestly, I've been in meetings with him. This is the first time I've really heard him talk about his relationship with masculinity, his relationship with sexual violence prevention and power-based violence. And I was like, we need to have him talk to the men of this campus, because, and again, not somebody that you would traditionally think of, traditionally go to and say, hey, he's the kind of guy that we need to have talk to, be a part of the Mentality Project. But now, like, yes, he does need to be part of the Mentality Project.
Thank you so much. I think you guys are giving us some ideas on who to reach out to, who to bring to the Mentality Mondays conversation. So I'm definitely taking notes over here. And you're still talking about the project a little bit more. How do you think the project can impact Tulane in our community, and what impact do you overall see it having as we continue to do what we're doing with it?
I think normalizing these conversations. I think these are conversations that, I mean, the culture of the United States, and I will say, especially right now, is not one of positive masculinity. And what people are seeing in the media, what people are seeing in movies and on news reports, that a lot of it is very toxic. If we can, and I will even say K through 12 system, I don't know that they are having these conversations. I don't work there. So maybe there are some really progressive schools who are having these conversations with their male identified students, but we need to start normalizing these conversations, having these conversations, having men be thinking more about their emotions, talking about their emotions, talking about how their actions may impact other people regardless of gender, how what they say, what they do may impact others, and making it not taboo, not a joke to be vulnerable, be talking about their mental well-being, their physical well-being beyond working out, and as Liz would say, being broy, like from working in the health center, like talking about the fact that when you are sick, go to the doctor. Those types of things that I think are traditionally not spoken about. But if we can normalize these conversations and make it more comfortable for these things to be happening, I think that would be a huge impact at Tulane.
And so I have a 15-year-old son. I'm also a 9-year-old daughter. And so it's really interesting to me to see the difference in the two of them and in what they get at their different schools. And, you know, obviously I'm dealing with a very small subset. And yet, I find it really interesting. I have seen at my son's two schools, his pre-K through 8th grade school and now his high school, the difference in the degree to which they talk about this stuff. He's at a large public school now where, you know, there's a relatively small counseling staff. Don't hear any of this kind of stuff. When he was in lower school and middle school, their counselors were absolutely talking, and they, you know, it was not as overt as like, let's talk about masculinity. It was much more about kindness and how to treat other people, and yet all of this was woven together. And so I wonder for our students whether that is happening too. You know, when they're younger, you're teaching like kindness, and everybody has to be friends with everybody. And then by the time they get to high school, it's like, okay, they've learned all that stuff. And the reality is, I feel like during that age group, you know, 14 to 17 or 18 is really when you need to be teaching them about healthy masculinity, both the men and the women. And so I agree with Alicia. I think normalizing these conversations and reinforcing some of the stuff that most of them probably learned when they were younger, but haven't talked about much since then, I think is, to me, one of the big keys of the program.
For sure. And I think, Alicia, I've had multiple conversations with you previously about the man box activity we would do during lunch and learns, and how Magnus, who's our student coordinator, and I set it up to be, you know, what are the stigmas around childhood, adolescence to teen, and then adulthood, and how all of those just build on one another. And for our students, most of our sessions were female identified individuals being participants, but it was so eye-opening for them to like see, like, yes, like I have siblings, brothers, cousins, and like this all makes sense. Like, and also now I understand like why my guy friends are the way they are, and how I can have these conversations with them that are real, and they can be vulnerable. And the interesting piece is, from those conversations, they said their friends are more vulnerable one-on-one than in a group setting. So how does group think and all of that impact how our male-identified students are acting towards one another and towards their other counterparts on campus?
I think one of the things that we can't expect is for people to change overnight. Right. Like, one conversation about this is not going to suddenly change 18 years worth of the culture you grew up in. Most of them are probably not the healthiest masculinity type cultures out there, at least based from what I think we see. But yeah, and not discounting the idea that women play a role in this too, or female identified people play a role in this too. I mean, I have heard female identified students say things like, you know, guys can't cry, guys shouldn't show emotion, or like teasing guys when they start to show their more vulnerable side. I'm like, okay, you are now showing toxic masculinity. So our female identified students do have a role to play in this as well.
I think that's like one of the points they got from the activities we did with lunch and learns. It's like, I can have these conversations, and it's okay to normalize things. And we're, you know, if my male identified friend cries, like, that's okay. Like, doesn't have to be happy or angry. Like, there doesn't have to be two emotions, and it has to be a binary. I think that's super, super important. I'm interested to learn, like, what gaps do you expect to continue, and which ones do you expect to change with conversations around healthy masculinity programming at Tulane?
Minus COVID.
Yeah, I'm just, minus COVID. Don't think about COVID. I was gonna say, yeah, a lot more, probably no in-person programming anytime in the near future, but ooh. I'm going to be very honest and say, basically since March, my life has consisted very much of COVID. So Chelsea and Jennifer have been taking the reins and doing a lot of the heavy lifting around sexual violence prevention and the Mentality Project. But I would say that one of the things that I think we also need to start kind of drawing into this as well are also kind of thinking about not just men as a whole, but then men and some of our subcultures and subgroups. So men of color, men of different cultural backgrounds, men in the LGBTQ community, people who identify as male who are not born as male, and the culture that they have tried to kind of fit themselves into. So I feel like there's lots of things that don't want to call them gaps, but other areas that we probably need to start delving into and thinking about that we just haven't yet over the last few years while we've been developing the Mentality Project.
I would just agree with all of that. Truly, I mean, you know, I think think one of the things that's really important to me, though, that again isn't really about a gap, is that I have felt the entire time that it's important for us to be comfortable with and happy with any progress that we make. You know, I think there are some folks who will say, you know, oh, the last climate survey was done X number of years ago. You know, next time we do it, you should see a really big change in the perpetration numbers. Like, I don't think that's going to happen. I think we may see a change, and it may be that they're higher because we have more reporting happening. But to me, if we are engaging our students in positive conversations about these things, and if we are making change happen for individuals, then the program has been successful. And that, to me, I think is the really important thing for everybody on campus to remember, that our goal here is education, period. And we hope that the outcome of that is also cultural change that prevents and eventually eliminates violence. But it's not realistic to think that that's going to happen in the scope of 2 years or 5 years or maybe even 10 years or longer. And so our willingness to sit with and be okay with that we've made some incremental change is incredibly important to me.
Yeah, to build on that, we have a transitory population. We
Right.
get them for 4 years. The
Right.
people who took the original climate survey are gone. So whenever we do the next one, it is an entirely new population of students who are almost part of a completely different generation.
Thank you so much. So really, I have a couple more questions left. But we're wondering, how do you think a two-lane student could be a positive role model against unhealthy masculinity and against violence? And what skills do you two see as being important and should be at the forefront for one to be a positive role model?
I'm going to take it back to one wave. And I think a huge thing that men can do is call each other out. If one of your friends is saying something, doing something that is sexual harassment, that is, going to potentially hurt someone, that whether it's physically, emotionally, call them out, say something. Don't be afraid, because that right there is a huge step forward. If someone knows that, hey, my friend is going to say something to me if I act this way, they're going to be less likely to do it. And they may think about that action a little bit more next time on how it may be impacting other people.
And I think the other important piece with that is we learned a lot during the creation of One Wave and during the first couple of pilot programs, that it's okay if that calling a person out waits. You know, you're not comfortable right then and there when somebody's saying something really inappropriate or really something stupid. Wait until the next day. Wait until you see them 4 days later, like, man, that was not okay. That's fine. Because we understand, and it's funny that the folks who identify or who created that program for us were very idealistic. Like, they just kept telling us, like, all you have to do is teach the student the skills, and they'll call someone out right in the middle of a party. Like, probably not. And so I think to me, like, that's one way you can be a positive role model and demonstrate healthy masculinity, is to be willing to have those harder, deeper conversations 48 hours later, a week later, rather than just the quick, easy, like, dude, stop it, and then moving on, which sometimes is hard and sometimes is easier. I think having the skills to do both of those things and determining which one is appropriate in the moment is really important to role modeling positive behavior.
Mm-hmm. Actually, that is a big thing right there, role modeling and positive behavior, doing what we're supposed to be doing, showing those positive, healthy masculinity type traits when you're out there on a regular daily basis, especially for our older students, and going back to those in fraternities. our older, wiser men in our fraternities, if you are portraying those positive, healthy behaviors, your younger counterparts are going to see that and model that because they're looking to you.
Our assistant vice president for campus life, Dr. Laura Osteen, she came up through fraternity and sorority organizing. She always talks about how fraternity houses should be the safest place on a campus for anybody, because those fraternities should be enacting the values that they espouse. And, you know, I don't expect our fraternity men to be sitting around like having long discussions about their values. Like, no, unlikely to happen. But a way that they can do that in a normal way is, again, just like Alicia was saying, to model positive behavior.
Thank you.
Really easy.
Yeah. And I think like the issue I see with the calling out in a party is there's probably likely that there is alcohol or other substances at play. So like, when you're calling someone out, like, you know, you could have like a lot of gossip about you and like go up and but is there any follow-up to that conversation, right? And like that's the flaw in that is like, yes, like we say alcohol is a social lubricant, you know, make them more confident in that moment, but are you going to be able to say something to your friend or any kind of peer later down the line when it happens again or after the conversation? I think our last question of the day before we start wrapping up is, what do you hope to see for the future of the Mentality Project and the partnership between the Well/Campus Health and Fraternity and Sorority Programs?
I mean, clearly stuff like this is great. I want it to continue. I think now we have two very strong people on both sides who, I mean, you've each been in for not very long, and you have put together a virtual program during a very interesting time in our higher education systems very quickly. So yeah, I would definitely like to see this type of creativity and new ways of thinking and looking around these topic areas, and also to continue to talking to the men on campus or the male identified people about what they would like to see.
I would echo all of that. Yes, absolutely. And then just go back to what we talked about earlier about bringing in some of those really positive male-identified folks on campus who are not the traditional people we might have gone to in the past and asked to participate in this. I think this is huge. And talking to our students about who those people are, who they think other guys on campus will listen to, or, you know, I think that part is essential.
Yeah, they're going to know the people that they might want to hear from. We probably don't know who they are, or we may know who they are, but we may never have thought about them in this type of role. So yeah, hearing from our students. Ooh, now I'm thinking about like a whole nomination process. Nominate your professor or student affairs professional, whomever.
Well, thank you both so much again for being a part of today's conversation. Before we wrap up, do you ladies have any final thoughts or words for those who are watching?
If you're watching, thank you. And I mean that not like just for watching, but if you're watching, it means you're engaged in this issue. And so that it means the world to us, that you are taking the time to care about making Tulane a better community, a more welcoming community, and a safer community.
I would totally agree with that. And then, yeah, if you're watching and you want to get involved, reach out to Chelsea and Anthony and find out ways to get involved, because the more the merrier.
Well, thank y'all again. We appreciate y'all taking the time out of your busy schedules. We know that COVID has really just specifically you both very, very busy. So we appreciate you giving us the time and chatting about the topics with us.
We'll see you
Thank you
next
for inviting
Monday.
us.
Having us.
Bye, y'all.